Well, over the past 3 months, millions of people have lost their loved ones, their jobs, their businesses due to the global pandemic. Well, at one point in his life, Congressman Dan Crenshaw felt as if he had lost everything. He fought his way back, and now he's written a book to help others take control when everything around them is falling apart. Take a look.
Texas Congressman Dan Crenshaw is one of the most recognizable freshman congressmen and a rising star in the Republican Party. A former Navy SEAL, Crenshaw was nearly blinded by an IED blast in Afghanistan. Through perseverance and what doctors called a miracle, his left eye partially recovered.
We were hoping for a miracle, and eventually that miracle did happen in the operating room.
Against all odds, Crenshaw went on to complete 2 more deployments before leaving the SEALs and pursuing political office. In his new book, Fortitude, Crenshaw shares advice on finding strength to deal with life's challenges and create solutions when none seem to exist.
Well, Representative Dan Crenshaw joins us now. And Congressman, it's an honor to have you with us.
Well, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
First, I've got to talk about the miracle that you can see today. Walk us through, how did that happen? How did you have the faith to believe that you would see when it seemed to be against all odds?
Yeah, I mean, when I walked away from that blast, I was totally blind. And the miracle seems to be God giving me the ability to self-deceive, because in self-deception, I at least retained a little bit of sanity. And so I walked off the battlefield totally blind, but really just assuming that I had dirt in my eyes. And there was a sort of willful ignorance and blissful ignorance, to say that. And then I woke, and I was put into a medically induced coma by doctors, and 5 days later woke up in Germany. And when I woke up, I couldn't see anything, and I was told more news, that my right eye was gone and that the left eye had barely a chance of seeing at all. And all I was able to hear at that time was, well, you're saying there's a chance, there's a small chance. I guess we'll just focus on that. And goals keep you sane, and I'm very goal oriented. It's how I move forward, and then I construct everything I do around that goal. And I think that's useful whether you're hoping to see again, or even if you're recovering from total blindness. What's your next goal, and how are you going to get there? Because in the end, we are here for purpose. God puts us here for purpose, but it is our duty to engage in free will and find that purpose and show the moral and psychological fortitude to pursue that purpose.
Well, you also were helped along, as I understand it from the book, by white chocolate mocha. What got you into white chocolate mocha?
When you're laying face down in a hospital, sometimes you get obsessed over certain drinks, and that was a really good one. What can I say?
All right. Well, let's talk about the book, because the book is, it's absolutely gripping what you went through and your fortitude to see it through. But the spark that led to the book was you walking to Congress, and on the way you're seeing a protester, and he has a slogan on his T-shirt. Tell us about that.
Sure. So, well, that opens up the book, that story, and it's a story that repeats itself many, many times. I think in many people's lives throughout DC. I want to say what sparked the idea for the book was me coming off of Saturday Night Live and having my first experience with outrage culture, and it sort of got me thinking: how do we provide a set of solutions to push back against this really poisonous cultural trend that we're seeing? And that trend manifests in things like that story where I open up the book, where you see a bunch of people protesting and angry, and their main message is actually just stay outraged. They have T-shirts that say stay outraged. They have stickers, that say stay outraged. And they have their political leaders like Bernie Sanders telling them to stay outraged. And of course, he's not the only one, but I reference a tweet just to back up what I'm saying here. And it's this sort of strange notion that outrage itself is the ends, that is the point. Now, in the end, of course, they want some kind of revolution, but but it's outrage itself that is the goal. They were not arguing for any policy, at least it was not apparent. If they were, the goal was just to be mad, and seek to manipulate people's emotions that way for whatever other policy ends they might have. But those were secondary to the first part, which was irrational, emotional exuberance.
Well, one of the things I love about your book is you don't just talk about the problem, you're giving us the solution. So what do you think as a society, as Americans, what's the solution going forward, and what are the steps we need to do to get there?
Yeah, you got to read the book. It's a long book just about solutions. And every chapter is a different way of thinking about this. And, in each chapter, it's not going to be what people think it is. Probably a lot of people are assuming it's kind of typical SEAL talk or maybe typical political talk. And it's neither. It's a mix of everything. I use SEAL stories, combat stories, training. I use personal anecdotes. I use pop culture. I use psychology and philosophy and history. And I try to weave all of these multidisciplinary threads together to tell a story of mental toughness. And I think there's many lessons in there. And I think one hopefully speaks to you. It just clicks and says, you know what, maybe I do this wrong and I should do this better. For example, I have a chapter on being still. And I mean that quite literally. Although there's a bit of a more clever origination for that phrase, but you'll have to read the book to understand what it is. And I talk about how the SEAL teams train to be still in the face of chaos, and how you can train to be still in the face of, an outrageous headline that just makes you mad, or a comment made by somebody that is trying to make you mad, and how to react to that and how to counter it, how to dive into issues, how to do your research. I said that a mentally weak person is somebody who kind of flies off the rails with a minimum amount of information, and a stronger person is somebody who says, hold on, wait a second, I'm going to look a few layers into this, and I'm going to come back stronger and harder. And that's just one example.
All right, well, let's apply the principles to something from the recent headlines, and that is the New York Times putting out an op-ed piece. It's an opinion piece. It's from a politician. It's from a policymaker. And then there's a backlash internally at the New York Times saying, well, this editorial is putting our reporters at physical risk of physical harm. Is that a symptom of this stay outrage, this victimhood, where we can't even have free speech, we can't even have public debate, we can't even have opinions being expressed that we may disagree with? Is that just a screaming symbol of where we are now?
Yeah, it really is. It's what is called safetyism by some psychologists. So I reference The Coddling of the American Mind. It's a book by Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff. I reference that book quite a bit throughout my book because they identify a lot of the sources of these problems, especially as it relates to Gen Z. And Gen Z has especially those who have gone to elite coastal institutions and then probably go worked at places like the New York Times. They're highly fragile people, very, very fragile. They do believe that words physically harm them. They believe this to the core. It's a very strange belief. It's never, ever been true. It's still not true now, but they believe it. So it's a mix of everything, right? When I say outrage culture, I am mixing together a bunch of trends, and I think safetyism and fragility are one of those trends, and it's scary. It's scary because it's so untrue. And the hypocrisy of the New York Times is also hard to ignore on this, because also this week, one of their Pulitzer Prize winning journalists, what's her name? I'm sorry, the name escapes me, but she was an editor for the 1619 Project, and she was overtly claiming that looting and rioting and burning stores down is not violence. She said that is not violence. And so you can say that on the one hand, coming from journalists at the New York Times, and your other journalists are saying that if you have a policy conversation about using the military under the Insurrection Act, because that's what they were reacting to from Senator Cotton, and you can disagree with that wholeheartedly. I mean, I think there's places to disagree with that. I'm not sure that that's necessary yet. But to say that it harms you physically, you have to wonder: do they know that they're sounding ridiculous? Do they know it, or are they actually visibly shaking? And I think they're visibly shaking. I think they're actually, they feel harmed, and it shows how deep the psychological self-manipulation has gone, and how much work we have to do as a country to get ourselves out of that, because it's wholly irrational. And you can't imagine these kids being successful or being able to confront anything difficult in life if this is what supposedly harms them.
Well, the book is called Fortitude, American Resilience in the Area of Outrage. It's available wherever books are sold. I encourage you to get it, and I encourage you to give it to your children and to your grandchildren. We need some resilience. We're facing some incredible challenges right now as a nation, and we need a nation of resilient people in order to handle this. So, Representative Crenshaw, thank you for the book. Thank you for being with us.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. Enjoy it, please. Thank you.